From make.powerapps.com, if you click on the side, you can actually see a ton of tables in here already. And this goes in with that common data model. A lot of the system tables in here are part of that. So for example, there's an account table, there's a contacts table. A lot of these you'll recognize because the precursor to them will just be the name of the table, as opposed to something like this where there's some kind of underscore. And that's actually specified by our publisher that we use when we add objects to a solution. So as you can see, account has no prename, address has no prename. So those are all system tables that Microsoft releases part of that. The other part that makes it really interesting, if you've ever gone through this and scrolled, you'll see that there are a lot more tables than you would imagine. If I click on all and scroll, we can see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tables. And this is because all of Power Platform is ironically built on top of Power Platform. I know it's a bit of like Power Platform inception, but there's even a table in here that contains all of my solutions. So any and every object in Power Platform will have a record in here. So don't freak out when you add a Dataverse data store and you're going in here. But that also brings us to another good point. It's really important to make sure when you're working in a shared space that you don't name your tables the same thing. If we have 15 different account tables and they're all using the same publisher, people are going to get confused and we're likely going to end up with overlapping project data. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at one of these tables. I'll click on the account table since I know there's going to be a lot of references. There's a lot of information to see initially. We can see a little bit of the table properties, so the table name, we can see the columns, the relationships that we've been talking about. So again, remember that Dataverse is a relational database and it is tabular, so we're very focused on this grid-like experience as well as all of the columns. Below, we get an immediate snapshot of our data. And just as a quick tip, if you hit this little drop down, I know select all is selected, but if you notice, that's definitely not the truth. So I go ahead and click on that and do that part. We can now see all of the different columns in this space. And if I click edit, we can break out into a view that will show me the data specifically. And if I wanted to change something about this, I can edit it directly and we'll see a little save icon popped up. And so now we're able to modify our table data just like you would in a SharePoint list kind of scenario. But if you notice, I have a ton more columns than we would expect SharePoint to be able to work with and many more of different data types. So we can start getting into those keys. So our unique IDs very much across all of Power Platform are going to look like this gibberish code. And that's because in order to maintain that everything is truly unique, these have to be a little bit longer, right? Like it can't be 4 or 5 digits. We could potentially have millions and millions of rows, which means in order for every object, everything stored in Dataverse to have that unique ID, I have to be specific with the length of my IDs. We can even see toggles being held, right? So kind of strange. And we'll get into a bit more of these when I set up a Dataverse table in a minute. I just wanted to go through and show you what it looks like to navigate through one initially. And so from this table, I can do quite a bit with it. I can click on columns and see a list view of all the different columns in this space. In Dataverse, every table column is going to have a display name as well as a system name. If you notice, right, instead of having colons and special characters and spaces, instead we're going to use underscores in more simple language like we would expect a backend system to use. And then of course we also have a column that shows me the data type. So I can go back and see what it looks like to work with those. When you choose a specific data type, it can make it easier for things like reporting and easier for user experience and easier to create in our apps. For example, if I attach a choice set to a dropdown in a Canvas app, I can really easily limit views. The problem is on the back end when I start working with Dataverse, beware what you wish for. Not all of these data types are easy to work with when we're trying to manipulate them. I could click new column at the top. I could choose a display name. Historically for descriptions, we kind of just threw something in there or even left it blank. But in the world of AI, we're going to end up doing a lot more with these descriptions as things move forward. So I would encourage you to start doing more with your descriptions, at least giving it a few relevant words. Next, on creating a column, we would select our data type. And this is where we really see the power of how much we get with Dataverse versus SharePoint lists and other data sources. So besides my standard text column, I have multiple different versions. I can even get into rich text where I can use things like header language and markdown in order to get truly detailed, very useful for writing things like email bodies. I can get into text areas where we're expecting multiple lines of text rather than just that single line of text. And then I can even have certain text types where we're expecting an email input, a phone number, or a URL. Below that, we can choose our behavior type. Choosing a calculated value allows me to use PowerFX and other languages to change and modify column values based on other values. You notice here it says that it's going to be discontinued for something called a formula column. So rather than having a text type that's calculated, we have a new column type called formula, which allows you to use that PowerFX language that we're used to using in Canvas apps to do some serious calculations. Below that, there is another new one that we can see, and it's called prompt. And we can add AI prompts in here to help us work with data. We could even do something like categorize based on some kind of location or information we've entered. So take the short description from the account and then potentially drop it into a category so that I know what potential vendor type or something like that may be. I'll go ahead and flip this back to text. And then further down, we have advanced options. So that schema name, right? So I mentioned that we have our display name and then we have an actual name. Well, that actual name is schema name. And we see our little precursor there, right? So I know that this is something that I'm creating. We can get into our character counts. A lot of times when people are creating in Dataverse, one of the primary issues they run into is they don't expect their users to enter as much information as they think. So when they use the default and they get the 100 character count, if you think about some longer addresses or maybe URLs, we can roll that over pretty quickly, and that will surface itself as an error to our end users. Further down, getting into the granularity of our security and provide information onto which groups are able to use this. So even though I have controls and security roles that will allow me to dictate access to the table itself, I can even go down to specific column level. And then when we get into masking rules, it's pretty neat once we do that. Say we're building an app for HR and we want to always mask, something like social security number because no one needs to see that particular information. The other one that's pretty neat with Dataverse is enable auditing, right? So with SharePoint, that's a bit more difficult to get into and get insights into. But with Dataverse, we can collect down to granular details, whether something has been modified, whether something has been updated or added to our table. And then finally, once I'm ready to go past that, I can go ahead and click Save. So let's see what it looks like to create a new table from scratch. If I go to New Table, and click Create New Table using Advanced Properties. And the reason why I'm saying why it looks like Advanced Properties is because I'm bypassing Copilot for a later demo. So by choosing this is the quote-unquote old school way that we would do this. I'll enter some initial details. I can even change the primary column. So remember with Dataverse table and strict table structures or tabular data structures, we're going to need that primary column in addition to our key. And so I can change the display name to be whatever I would like it to be. There are a lot more things we can do on these Dataverse tables. Remember that Dataverse is not just usable for the model-driven apps that we create, but it needs to be able to support very large systems that have much more in-depth requirements than we're used to. We have the ability to apply duplicate detection rules. So for example, on a vendor table or a contacts table, I want to make sure that we don't have 15 different versions of the same person entered. Again, we get into even more auditing, being able to track table changes, the ability to enable longer term retention so that we're not on our auditing, so that it's not recycled every 28 days. Another part that people wouldn't expect is the ability to connect to SharePoint document management. Dataverse is a premium data store, and storing documents can be quite extensive. And SharePoint does that quite well for us. So rather than trying to duplicate that functionality into Dataverse, we can actually just leverage our SharePoint document management system and connect that in here to be able to surface those in applications and things like that we would create. Below, we can see certain aspects that get deeper into our relationship management, so having connections tables. And then further, the ability to work with it offline. Yes, Dataverse can be worked with offline. So we need an app for a warehouse structure where we know Wi-Fi is going to be spotty or insufficient. We can build these hybrid structures for mobile applications to be offline so that when a wireless signal is reobtained, that information can be synced to the cloud. So again, a lot of fun stuff that we can do with Dataverse that we can't necessarily do in our other data stores. So once I go ahead and hit save, we'll be dropped into our screen that we saw with the accounts table. And I can go ahead and set up a relationship. So now that I have powered up, let's go ahead and see if we can't create a relationship to that. So I'll go ahead and click new relationship. We have several different relationship types, and these are difficult to remember how they work. Oftentimes, it's easier to think of it as a classroom to student scenario. So, in one classroom, I will have many students. So, that means I kind of want a special column to show up on the student side. So, in this case, if I want one account to potentially have many powered ups, whatever that may mean, I would probably choose the many to one. There is a way that I can cheat to do this, and I am going to go ahead and choose that cheat method. So I'm going to go ahead and click new, and I'm going to go to columns, and I'm going to choose a special column type called lookup. And lookup helps me to bypass having to do the mental gymnastics of figuring out which way this is going. And so I'll go ahead and give this column a name. All columns are going to require a name, but it's asking me for the table that I want to relate it to. And so in this case, if powered up is going to be linked to potentially various different accounts, but only one account, I want the column that displays that to be here. I promise this will make much more sense when we look at our model-driven app tutorials later today and how these relationships show up. I would strongly encourage you to play with them.